So the trouble with tips, what is this about? If your iron tip on your soldering iron, which is this part right here, is not cleaned and working properly, you're not going to get it to melt your solder correctly. This is a brand new iron. This part is called the barrel, and these are the adjustment screws right here that hold the tip in, and then this is your tip. Now, a brand new iron comes, it looks nice and shiny silver. The tip will have paint on the end. The paint just protects it from oxidation. This is actually going to burn off, and you're going to wipe it off on a wet sponge. The first time you use an iron, it may smoke come from these holes right here. That's just from the residue from manufacturing. It only does it like maybe the first time, and then it goes away. I usually like my new iron about the third time I use it, and the reason for this is because the tip gets nice and tinned is what we call it. It's tinned. It's coated with a nice coating of solder, and it just works very well. But it's very important the first time you use your iron to use it properly and get your tip started off in the right way. All right, I have my new iron plugged in. It's been in on about 30 seconds or so. I'm going to let it heat up, and you can see this blue on there will start to turn black. I can feel there's some heat coming from that barrel. It's not quite heated up yet, but it's starting to get there. And I just kind of babysit it. It's a brand new iron. I don't want to get my tip ruined. I can actually see that the blue paint's getting a little liquidy. I'm going to wipe it off on my wet sponge. You hear it sizzle. You know it's getting hot, but that blue paint, it's not quite coming off yet. So it's not heated up quite enough yet. I'm going to wait a little bit. And again, at this point, if I leave this iron on, sitting idle, just burning away, that blue paint's going to turn black, and it's going to kind of burn on there. You need to really wipe it off. So brand new iron, babysit it, take your time, watch it, and just keep checking it by wiping it off on the wet sponge. And it's getting there. It's starting to turn a little more black. And I can see that getting really hot underneath there. Okay. I'm going to wipe it off again on the wet sponge, and there we go. We can start to see some of the paint coming off, and we'll just give it another second here. Every time you do wipe the tip off on the wet sponge, it cools it down slightly. So it's kind of like a little temperature control in a way. So I'm going to melt it off again. There we go. It's wiping off really good now. So you can see the paint, there's a little bit on the end there. I'm just going to wipe it off. It's probably ready to go now. So get all the little crusts off there. Now, the first thing I want to do is take my solder, and I'm going to bring it over here to my tip, and I'm going to melt some solder on there. And I'm just going to press it on. I'm going to hold it there a second. And you can see it starts to melt on there. I got a little blob going. I'll flip it over and get some on the other side. Alright, now I've got some solder on there. I can actually kind of tap it off onto my, see that little ball that came off of there. But what I want to do is wipe it off on my wet sponge. So I'm going to wipe both sides off. Notice that I do wipe it. I don't shove my tip into the sponge. Okay, I'm going to do this again. So again, I'm going to put some more solder in here. I'm going to melt it on, get it coated around that tip, and then I'm going to come over here to my sponge and just wipe it off. And now see how nice and silvery that is? Again, this is brand new, so it's going to look really just most silver this time. Flip it over, get some more solder on there. And I do that 2 or 3 times, and now I've got a great tinned, it's got a little coating of solder on there, which is great. Now at this point, I don't want to let this iron sit idle. Again, I'm going to either use it and start soldering. I've got my project ready to go, and I can start soldering it, or I can turn it off. Now, a good thing to do when you go to turn it off is, and I'm just going to come right down here and get some solder off my mat, is put some solder on the end of this iron, kind of coat it up real good. Or here, I can get some more on here. Either way, just get some solder on there. And with that solder on there, go ahead and turn that iron off, just like that. The solder on that tip's going to stay on there and act like a cap to the end of your iron. Then when you go to reheat this, that solder will melt and come right off. But it's a good protector, and it just keeps it nice and coated. That way, if you did turn it on, forget about it, leave it for a little too long, at least it's got some solder on the tip to help keep it coated. So that's how you do a brand new iron. Now I'm going to show you and see how the barrel now is starting to get dark too, just from this first use. It just does that. The heat will turn the metal that darker color. Now let me show you another iron that's been used a while. Here's my trusty iron that I have on my desk. As you can see, it's not as shiny silver. It is very dark and discolored, and that's fine. The screws are darker. The tip looks kind of blackened, but it's not blackened so much that I can't use it. It's actually tinned very well. So on this old one, I mean, this right here, you can see this is the part that I want to be concerned about. It's dark, but it's silvery. And when I go to wipe this off on a wet sponge, I will see some silver show up there, and I know it's working good and it's making a good connection. Here is an iron that somebody left on and did not put solder on it. Possibly melted some sponge on there. I can't quite tell, but it's very dark and blackened. And that isn't good. And when you go to wipe this off on a wet sponge, if you notice that the blackness does not go away temporarily after wiping it off, then it's not going to melt your solder really well. Now you can fix a tip like this and get it back working well. It just takes a little practice, but I'm a little worked and I'll show you.